Welcome to the Aquatic Life, a podcast about underwater photography, diving, and adventure travel. I'm Todd Reimer, and with me as always is Dalton Hamm.
Hey bud, what's going on?
Not much. Welcome everyone to episode 2. We decided our first topic is going to be getting started in underwater photography. That can obviously be broken up into lots of different topics. So we're going to start off with the first section, which is which type of underwater housing and camera should I choose if I'm interested in. So I'm really excited to chat with you and reminisce about our times as we got started in underwater photography and hopefully have some good tips to share with our audience here. Before we get into our main topic, let's just talk about a week in review. So why don't we talk about what you've been working on in general, and then we can dive into our main topic.
Yeah, sounds good. So last Sunday Fun Day, we went and shot XFL. They're still cruising along into week 3 and 4. Week 4 was last week. Yeah, so they're cruising along into week 4 and week 5 this week. It's an interesting thing, man. Tell you, it's not quite the NFL, that's for sure, but it's fun.
I think it's as photographers, it's to our benefit, right? Because the basic structures of how things are working are the same. The same rules and regulations for the most part are the same as in the NFL, where you can go, what you can do. If anything, a little bit more lax.
Yeah, for sure. They're still getting good numbers too. I mean, I know numbers have kind of dwindled off a little bit, but from what I saw, their overall numbers were still higher than like the NFL Combine and the PGA and some of the other sporting events that we're on. So I think they're doing okay. We'll just see how the trend continues for the next few weeks.
Since their audience doesn't know, why don't you tell people why you get to shoot the games? What do you do with your photos that you shoot?
Well, I'm a professional sports photographer. Shoot for a wire service, and so after I shoot a game, I push all of those photos up to a wire service, and then they get distributed around the world to different newspapers, magazines, websites, blogs, news outlets, things like that. Yeah. So it's a lot of fun. Something to do while we're on dry land.
Yeah. As for me, one is just getting up to speed on all this podcast business. As you know, neither of us are experts. It's our first foray into the podcast biz, so there's lots of research to be had. Just getting everything started, learning best practices, getting our site set up, ideas to get this thing off the ground. So that's been taking up a lot of my time, doing lots of fun research on that. And then the other half of my job is looking for work. Since photography isn't my main source of income, I have to look for IT work. So been on the job hunt there and have some leads. Hopefully something will pan out in the near future, but I got some good leads, some good irons in the fire. So that's been keeping me busy this week. I am looking forward to this weekend because I get to tag along with you to shoot more football this weekend. So really, really looking forward to having a good time shooting some more sports. It's been a lot of fun. That's awesome. Well, I am sure that we've talked enough non-underwater photography related stuff. So why don't we jump on into our very first topic that's pretty exciting. So as I stated at the top, why don't we just start kind of from the beginning? There's obviously a few different things we want to talk to, and we'll break that out into a few different episodes. But one of the first things that everyone will want to ask is, what camera type should I choose if I want to, where do I get started? What camera should I choose? What camera housing should I choose? And I'm sure we have a lot of different ways we can get into this here, but why don't we first kind of give everyone an idea of how we got started and where we are today.
Yeah, what did we start with, Todd?
I think shortly after we got certified, we started with a point-and-shoot camera called the Olympus SP350. And it was just a little point-and-shoot. I think it shot 8 megapixels.
Maybe.
But the big... yeah, maybe, if that. And we'll get into this later. The whole big reason why we chose that is it was one of the few point-and-shoot cameras that had a hot shoe on it. So it allowed us to graduate later on that if we wanted to shoot with a strobe and have direct syncing where the camera could talk directly to the strobe, it would allow you to do that. But the camera was a couple $100, and the housing, we had an Icolite housing, and that was just a couple $100 at the time. It wasn't too expensive, and about on par with other ones. I don't know. What were your thoughts? I thought it was a great way to start.
Yeah, it was a great starter camera. I mean, short of being able to take your DSLR in the water, which would have been a big step, right? That would have been a huge that scared the bejeebus out of me at the time. But yeah, I mean, it was a good point and shoot. Like you said, it had a hot shoe. You were able to shoot manual on it. I remember being able to shoot manual, and I believe that it shot raw as well.
It did, yes. Good memory. It was also one of the few point shoots that also shot raw images.
Yeah, all three things that are kind of important when you're underwater.
Yeah, but I think that was the big thing, is we both were just certified. We were in the same boat saying, okay, well, we both already own this very expensive SLR camera equipment, high-end cameras and high-end lenses, and the thought of putting that in underwater housing and potentially losing tens of thousands of dollars if something goes wrong was super scary. And we did not want to jump in with both feet right away, being so green in the field.
Yeah, and you want to make sure that you like it, right? I mean,
yes, totally.
Housing for a underwater DSLR, I mean, you're talking several grand.
Yep.
By the time it's all said and done, with ports, extensions, multiple ports between macro, wide angle, domes, and adding lighting and all that other stuff. I mean, you're talking another $5,000, $10,000 and just in housing and lights and stuff. So the Olympus SP350, I think, between the housing, the camera, we were into it for like $500.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Like
I mean, that is the nice thing. We'll kind of get into that here next. But that is the nice thing of starting out with a point and shoot underwater, is you don't have to have a housing and then a port to go with that housing, because usually a point and shoot already has the port that to accommodate the lens built in.
It had its other benefits too. You know, it gave you a little bit of whatever your capabilities of the camera are, as far as zooming or wide angle or macro. You have that, where with most DSLRs, you're stuck at I'm either going to shoot wide angle or I'm going to shoot macro.
Exactly. Yep.
You know, so,
exactly.
You know, all things that'll be covered in our conversation overall, but it was all things that we were trying to figure out in the beginning.
So how long was it before we upgraded? Do you remember how long we stayed with our point and shoot?
I'm going to say 6 months.
Okay. I seem to remember it being longer, but maybe not. Yeah, I would say
a year?
I'm not sure because it's so long ago now, but I felt like we had a year's worth of use, but we had several dive trips of heavy use with the.
Well, I was trying to think. So we went to the Caymans and we did Curacao with the 350, right? With SP350
for sure. Yep.
But I remember when we went to the Bahamas to do the shark dives, I had upgraded to that CNC housing for my.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
For my Nikon.
And you may have started earlier than me. I think you might have gotten your housing, and I was still shooting with my Olympus after you had already had a housing for your SLR. That was good. It didn't take us very long before we knew we were happy with the results we were getting, but we knew we could do it. We were enjoying our results, and we're ready. You know, having used the point and shoot, we kind of realized what the potential, what we could get, and that we were really enjoying taking the photos, and where it was time to graduate to something bigger, and then we were ready to take that jump and make that investment.
Yeah.
So before we get into some more details of that topic, why don't we take a step back and say, you know what are things people should really think about before they even consider buying a camera?
I think before they even get to the point of buying a camera is you really need to be a good diver. Good diver, comfortable in the water. I personally, as an instructor and dive professional, I think you should probably have at minimum, like I would say 25 dives, but I know that's a lot. So I would say at minimum 10 dives. I think you should have your advanced open water before you even think about starting to take a camera down. Now that's not saying you can't have a GoPro and strap it to your wrist or something
Right.
and just, video your dive, but I wouldn't focus on photography until you've probably done, like I said, done your advanced open water, or at least take for Patty, take the peak performance buoyancy. Say that 3 times really fast.
Exactly. You beat me to it.
Or which you can take as part of your advanced training. Or same thing with NAUI. But just get really, really good at controlling your buoyancy in the water.
Diving with a camera rig underwater changes because you're so focused on taking photos and things like that. You really need to have good buoyancy and stuff, and be okay with your air consumption thing, and have diving under your belt be as comfortable as possible, because once you have something else to think about, there's just your diving skill gets so much worse just by having that camera that concentrate on. So you really have to be
you start forgetting about everything else.
Exactly.
You forget about your dive buddy, you forget about looking at your air, you forget about how long have I been down here.
Yep. So excellent point, Dalton. What else you got?
Just the biggest thing that we were told during our scuba class, same thing I tell students now, is just don't touch, don't take, take only pictures, leave only bubbles, basically.
Yes.
And so it's don't touch anything, don't take anything. It's like being a guest in someone else's home. You want to pay attention and be on your best behavior. Coral is extremely delicate, so if you break something off, it could take years to fix, for it to fix itself.
Yeah.
Not to mention, it can do some pretty gnarly damage to you as well. I mean, I think we've both had our run-ins with fire coral, and that doesn't feel too good when you touch it.
It does not.
But yeah, just don't touch, don't take. You want to be cognizant of where you are in the water column and where other people are, so you're not bumping into other people. And I mean, what are some of the good diving etiquette things that you've learned along the way, Todd?
Yeah, I think the other big thing is, as an underwater photographer, you really need to understand, if you're on a dive trip, even if you have the best buoyancy and the best skills underwater, and you're with a group, you need to make sure that you should be letting all the non-photographers look and review anything a dive guide points out on a trip before you go out to it. Because no matter what, someone just wants to go look at something with light and see it, it's going to take them maybe 1 second to 5 seconds to look at it. When you go to, as a photographer, to take pictures, it's going to take you, time to look to see what are you supposed to be shooting. Okay, now looking at it, you're gonna swim back for a second, adjust the settings based on the type of photo you want to take. Go in, set up the shot, take a few clicks. It's going to, at minimum, take you a good minute to their 5 seconds to look at something. So because of that, wherever you are, if you're with a group of 4 other divers and 2 or 3 of them are non-photographers, let them go first. That it's just good etiquette to make sure other divers are having a good time and they're not just sitting there and waiting for 2 to 5 minutes for you to mess with your camera settings to look at something when they just want to see it.
Or even worse, I know there's been times that, you and I have been in the water with another underwater photographer, and they have literally, basically hogged up a turtle and harassed the turtle until the point where the turtle leaves, and then nobody
Yes.
gets to enjoy it. So
Yep. Yeah, that was going to be the next point. Is then even worse when you're with a group of photographers. You'll find that as underwater photographers in general, we don't have the best reputations underwater because one, people are have not practiced and perfected their buoyancy, and two, they have a tendency to get so wrapped up in getting the shot that they just lose consideration for everyone around them, including other photographers. So the good rule of thumb there is if you are with other photographers, you've let all your non-photographers see what they want to see, and then it's the photographer's time to look at a subject they want to take. And you want to, when approaching wildlife, you always should be, we'll get into this in a whole nother episode, but you basically want to make sure you're not scaring the wildlife off. But even so, even if it's a macro subject and they're perfectly fine with the photographer, you still have, those 2 to 3 other photographers waiting for you. So you want to take maybe up to 4 shots max before, it's your time to review your images, go to the next guy, take a photo. If you want to go and shoot some more photos afterwards, just go to the back of the line. You queue up, you take a few shots, and then let the next photographer go. And if you want to get more, just swim back around, let them go, and then do that there. Having said that, you'll find that a vast majority of photographers don't practice this, but it doesn't matter. We want to set a good example, and it's really just good etiquette to do this.
And obviously, the more experience you get, the more dives you get, then you can look at talking with the dive guide on your trip and say, hey, listen, me and my buddy, we're going to buddy up together, and we're just going to hang back a little bit from you guys. And then, the two of you can, as long as you keep up with the group, oftentimes I'll say, okay, cool. And yeah, you can linger a little bit to take some photos away from the crowd. You just make sure that you keep up with the group overall.
Yep, good points. There's a lot more we'll get into in other episodes, but I think those are the things. You want to have good diving down. You want to be comfortable in the water. You want to make sure you actually enjoy diving. So you obviously don't want to go and spend any money on camera equipment if you don't actually enjoy going on a dive. So yeah, you may have 25 dives under you, but are you really enjoying it? Do you want to continue doing that? Definitely make sure you're passionate about diving and really enjoy seeing all the sea life that you want to make that next step before making any purchases. Give it a couple more dive trips.
Yeah, I mean, diving's not for everyone. It can be quite the addiction once you if you do fall for it. But if it's not for you, that's okay. You don't have to invest in dive gear and housings and all of that off the bat. Just kind of ease into it, especially with some of the tools that people have available to them today, like GoPros and action cams and things like that.
Yeah, and we're going to jump into that next topic, but one last point I wanted to bring up is work on your, make sure you also have good basic photography skills and basic understanding of how your camera works. Exposure triangle, understand what your aperture and shutter speeds are and film speed. All those types of things that if you're already a photographer and you know all that stuff, we see a lot of that and now you want to take pictures underwater. That's kind of the path we came down. But there's a lot of people that I've met, and I'm sure you have too, Dalton, is where they haven't. They're not coming from a photography background, but they see all this amazing stuff underwater and know that how cool would it be to get pictures of what they're seeing. Especially for those group of people, it's good to kind of start getting understanding of more than basic photography of point and shoot type stuff. Understand how some more advanced photography features work. Those types of skills, it's not that hard to come up to speed on, and we'll again go through a full episode of topside stuff and talk about photography things. But that's also a good point to bring up, is if you want to do it, it's not just as simple. Other than with GoPros and some other things, the more good fundamental photography skills you can build up, a lot of those types of skill sets will apply to your underwater photography as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even with GoPros, I mean, just composition.
Mm-hmm.
Just have a good idea for rule of thirds, things like that,
Yep.
and just understand basic composition will make or break a lot of photos.
Why don't we jump down to talking about what kind of options we can consider once they said, okay, yeah, I've got my buoyancy down. I love diving. I'm passionate about being able to take photos underwater. So, what kind of options do people have?
Well, I think that it's even more than just okay, I have a passion for diving. I enjoy it. I'm going to continue to do this for the rest of my life or for the foreseeable future. I think the other decision that really weighs heavily on it is, what are you trying to do? Are you going to try to sell some photos? Are you going to try to get published? Or are you just doing these for yourself? Is it just for memories in
Sure.
your Facebook or Instagram posts? What is your end goal?
Right.
Because that'll also determine how far down the rabbit hole you want to go. You
For
know,
sure.
if you're just starting out, and I think a lot of people could benefit just from going with a GoPro. A lot of people already have them. They're pretty cheap to get into. You can buy a GoPro. Blah, blah, blah. You can buy a GoPro 3 pretty cheap these days. Or if you want to splurge on the latest GoPro 8, you can do that as well. Um,
Yep.
so it just depends on what you want to get into, how much you want to spend. I really think you shouldn't exceed your budget. I think you should have a strong budget and say, okay, this is what I can spend. What can I get in that price range? And if that means buying used, buy used.
Right.
I've had a ton of equipment that's used. Um, I think that CNC housing, the reason I went to it so quickly was because I got a incredible deal on it used.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Um, and so I would probably just say start out with a GoPro or a point and shoot. I know you can get into both of those for, depending if you're buying used or new, anywhere between $100 and $400. Um,
Yeah, I agree. I think GoPro type of camera is it's got a ton of things going for it. The first one, as you mentioned, is price point. You buy the GoPro brand, yeah, you're into it for anywhere from $200 to $400, depending on if you get the latest model. But there's lots of competitors out there. DJI has their Osmo Action. If you look on Amazon or wherever, there's a lot of popular off brands that I've seen lots of divers use this brand called YI 4K, and it's
mhm.
basically
Yep.
a GoPro knockoff, but it shoots 4K video and takes great photos. It's very similar sensor and menu, and it's only like $100. So there's very minimal barriers to entry.
I just looked up on Amazon, and the GoPro Hero 5. They're up to the Hero 8 right now, but the Hero 5, I have that one as well as the 8. And it's still great, but it's on Amazon renewed from GoPro for $139. You do that, housing and a couple of lights, you're into something decent for under $300.
Yep.
So
And if that budget's still too much for you, there's an off-brand version that with an underwater housing, 20 megapixels, and goes underwater for to well past scuba diving recreational events, and it's 69.97. So,
yeah, yeah.
back in the day when we were first learning, that there was nothing at that price point. Now there's lots of options there, and there's lots of ways to take really cool videos and photos and not have to worry too much about anything happening to that while you're diving, so you won't feel too bad.
In worst case
Yep.
scenario, you're out $70.
Exactly. And the other cool thing is that these GoPro type action cam cameras also have attachments. You can get mini domes for them if you want to do little split shots, which we'll talk about later, or if you want to shoot macro, you can get little macro adapters that let you take photos really close. All for stuff again, all for your GoPro, which is mind blowing considering where we came from. None of that stuff was available. I don't want to sound like an old fogey or anything, but I just think it's pretty exciting that you can do all this great stuff with not having to spend that much money nowadays.
Just the how far technology has come in the last 15 years or so is crazy. I mean,
Yep.
Where we were having to look at point and shoots. And advanced point and shoots, and they weren't necessarily inexpensive at the time. I mean, I think like I said, I think we got into both of them for like around $600, but I think it was about half and half on price. I think the camera was like $200 to $300,
Yep.
and then the housing was around another $300.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think we were pretty much. As a general rule of thumb, your housing is going to cost about as much as your camera body did. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but as a general rule of thumb. Right
on. So what's the next step up? So GoPro is there. People have the GoPro. They're getting good photos and videos. They love it, but they want to get to the next level and get a little bit better quality. What would you say would be the next step up in cost, and then what are the benefits of having a different type of thing that's not a GoPro to be able to shoot?
I would look at some of the point and shoots, like the Panasonic. They make a Lumix. I think it's I forget what model number it is. I want to say a S60 or something like that, and get a Aquatic housing and put it in there. And then you can add lights with a fiber optic cable. I would look at a point and shoot that'll shoot RAW.
Yep. It still applies.
Hot shoe does not apply as much anymore. With fiber optic cables, you can fire your strobes from the strobe on your camera.
So for those uninitiated, why don't you tell people why shooting RAW is especially important in underwater photography?
The short version is a JPEG is a compressed file that when you take the photo, your camera, what you see on the back of the screen is what is saved in the JPEG, and any extraneous information is then discarded. Where a RAW file is pretty much everything that the sensor sees, it keeps.
Yep, perfect.
And so you have a lot more latitude to control white balance, pull back highlights, open up shadows, correct exposure if you had exposure problems, things like that.
I think in underwater photography in my experience, shooting RAW has a benefit on the top side of especially saving if things are way too exposed, overexposed, or underexposed. You can save that. Usually white balance it has minor tweaks, but you probably could save a white balance error even on a JPEG, and it's not that big of a deal. But underwater, correct, there's so much variation in white balance that shooting RAW definitely saves you if your white balance is off, because everything has such a strong color cast. You really need to shoot RAW, especially on shooting wide angle. It will come into play a lot more. So definitely RAW is a big thing. If your camera has it, you should definitely be shooting it.
Absolutely.
Another brand I'd bring up, again, is still Olympus. It's not a very popular camera brand here in the States overall, but they've always had a niche in underwater photography. So they have a lot of cool camera systems and underwater housings that are meant for that are meant for underwater photographers that are less expensive and a lot more compact than similar brands where you just want to take an SLR from Canon or Nikon and just get a housing for it and a strobe for it. Yeah. They have a lot of dedicated options for you that many other camera brands don't offer. So they're definitely a brand worth looking at for a starter camera as well.
For sure. And then you have dedicated companies like CNC.
Sea Life.
Sea Life, thank you. like Sea Life, that they are a diving company that is just dedicated to making point and shoots that are underwater, meant for underwater. They have kits that come with your light, your tray, and your camera. They all have wet lenses that you can put on to switch from macro to wide angle. And it's just really a solid company. They have really great customer support. Our buddy Ethan, yep. He lost his Sea Life camera in Cozumel one time, and he called up Sea Life and said, "Hey, this is what happened. It was the wrist strap had come apart from the tray." And, he told him what happened, and they apologized and sent him a new kit.
Several of these underwater photography specialized housing manufacturers or camera makers, they tend to have amazing customer support. And Sea Life is definitely one of them. But it's a great company. It's a great company that has a lot of great starter kits. They're super popular because they have this nice setup that's super compact where it has a strobe already built in, and it's kind of on similar to it's basically a flexible pod.
It's like an articulating, like a Gorilla Pod, right?
Like a Gorilla Pod, yeah. Sorry to keep dropping brands here, but that's the closest thing first thing that comes to mind. And so it's nice. It packs down small, and you've got everything good to go there, and you can still adjust the direction of your light. And it's attached there. And again, nothing else to buy, no arms to have to deal with, things like that. So another great option. And like you said, it has lots of, just like Olympus, it has a lot. You can have a wide angle wet mount or a macro wet mount, and it all just throws right on the top and allows you to expand your different types of photography and still get lots of good results.
And for everybody out there, why don't you tell them what a wet mount lens is?
When you're stuck with an SLR and you've made that jump, a lot of times you have to make a decision before you get in the water. Am I going to attach my wide angle lens and my appropriate port, or am I going to shoot macro and basically have a macro lens and have a macro port to accommodate that lens? And that whole dive, you're just shooting one or the other. So you basically are stuck. And if you're shooting macro, you're most likely to see whale sharks and manta rays swim right by you because they know you have a macro lens and you can't get a good photo with them. And similarly, when you're shooting wide angle, hoping to see big fish, and then you're going to see the super rare, I don't know, a blue ring octopus on that on the dive that was never supposed to be there, or a pygmy seahorse, and you're stuck. And that's kind of one of the downsides of when you do graduate to something that big, is you're limited in that capacity. But on some smaller rigs, on point and shoots, on Sea Life cameras, on Olympus cameras, and things like that, you already have a range because usually there's an integrated zoom lens, but it's not that big. It's kind of a normal range. Maybe it's 15 or 18 millimeters to 40 or to 70. But a wet mount lens basically is something that basically goes to in front of your housing that is already protecting your camera. It goes basically to where that lens ends and either screws on or bayonets on. It just attaches to it, and we'll take your lens that maybe is shooting at 18 millimeters, and it has another lens on it, and it'll let you shoot wide angle. So it basically has a different type of glass that transforms your lens into another thing without having to take out and put a different lens on. So it transforms it either one way or the other. So if you happen to already be shooting wide angle, but you want to shoot wider because you want to do close focus wide angle, you can put a fisheye on that, and now you have a bigger point of view. Or on the reverse, if you want to be able to shoot super close up and shoot something really tiny, you can also have a wet mount lens that just goes right over the top of the camera and attaches there. And it's called wet mount because obviously there's going to be water in between. You're basically taking something that goes right into the front of where your housing ends, and you can take it with you and pop it on and off while you're underwater.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, just really quick, a lot of people think 15 millimeter, well, that's pretty wide. The point and shoots are very similar to consumer DSLRs. There's usually a crop factor.
Right.
So if you have a point and shoot, it's probably a 1.5 or 1.6 crop factor. So your 15 millimeter is really going to be like a 22 millimeter. So,
Yep.
and an underwater wider is better. Yeah, there's such a huge difference between, even say 17 millimeter and 15 millimeter or 14 millimeter. There's such a huge difference in those. So that wet mount lens does make quite a bit of difference.
Yeah. So that's a good point. I think maybe that'll bring us into our next thing is.
I think that at the point you're deciding on your point and shoot versus, do I jump ahead and go to the SLR? I think that is going to depend on if you want to, if you love shooting, say you're already a photographer and now you've been diving, you've got quite a few dives under your belt, you've used the GoPro for a little bit, and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm into this. I think you could probably skip the point and shoot and just go to taking your DSLR underwater. The other thing is, it goes back to what is your goal? What needs are you trying to meet? If you're just trying to capture some fun things on your dive, I might not go past the point and shoot. I might stop at point and shoot and go like our buddy Ethan.
Yep.
Got a ton of dives, great diver, good guy, but he's not really trying to sell any photos or anything like that. He's just trying to take some good photos that he can look back and remember and print for in his house and just have some nice looking images. And I've told him, and he still has his sea life, and there's no need for him to go to the DSLR route. He's like, it's compact, it makes his dive easy.
You'll kind of get an idea over the course of X amount of dives of which type of wildlife that you enjoy taking pictures of. It's just the natural course of things. Like I'll give an example is most divers will go through and they want to get all the pelagics. They want to get as many sharks as they want to see, and rays and tiger sharks and whale sharks. And they'll realize that's all they want to take photos of. And in those cases, that you're going to want to be able to stick with cameras that will allow you to take pictures of big things, which will lead you down one path. Versus a lot of experienced divers, as they get more and more experiences, they'll have seen all their big animals, and they're more interested in all the little stuff that's super rare, and really want to concentrate on smaller sea life, and then want to take pictures of macro subjects, all the small stuff. Having said that, if you happen to be one of the divers that fall into the column B, where you really like to take pictures of small things, there is going to be a benefit for you that it's easier to take really, really good photos of macro subjects on cameras like point and shoots, sea life cameras, smaller Olympus cameras, things like that. It's easier for many reasons, which we'll get into, to be able to take high quality macro subjects using a point and shoot or a camera geared towards macro than it is taking a good wide angle shot with a point and shoot. You'll be able to get good ones, but like professional quality shots, I've seen a lot of people take really amazing macro with point and shoot with a diopter that lets you shoot even closer, and it's not very expensive to get that kit, but you can get amazing professional quality photos on macro. It's a lot harder to do that same level of photography, in my experience, with wide angle.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things for everybody to remember is that the deeper down the rabbit hole you go, and the bigger your camera, DSLR, and housing and kit gets to be, with strobes and focusing lights and arms and all this other stuff, um, it gets bigger, heavier, more bulky, harder to lug around, harder to dive with. Where with the point and shoots with just one light, you can get some really great shots, and you hardly know it's there. You can clip it onto your BC when you're climbing back on the boat if you want. You don't even have to hand it off to the dive master or anything like that. So it makes diving a lot easier. It makes your dive experience it's a whole nother dive experience to dive with a point and shoot versus a DSLR, which we'll get into on another episode. But that's another thing to keep in mind when you're trying to go down this when you're going down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's, if anything you're going to get from this podcast is, the whole idea of crawling before you can walk. As tempted as you may be to jump in and you have all the money in the world to just get your SLR underwater, I really don't recommend that. You're going to just have so much harder of a time dealing with all the things you have to deal with on a professional camera and a housing built around it versus you'll just be able to enjoy your diving so much more, where you can just go enjoy your dive, and then when you see something really cool, take your camera that's nice and small and compact and get some good photos out of it, because it's nice and small, and your priority is not photography, it's diving to start out, and you can get the best of both worlds that way if you start with a point and shoot or a GoPro.
Exactly.
Yeah. Having said that, you mentioned on a few times about lighting and strobes. I think that's another good topic before we wrap things up. What's the benefit of having strobes underwater, and when should they get around to it, and what circumstances do they need it?
Well, I think that's a whole
yes,
a whole Pandora's box in and of itself. But I think the short version would be that, in my opinion, I think you should add light right away. Even if you're shooting with a GoPro, you can get a tray mount for it where you can put a couple of, for lack of a better term, video flashlights. They're really bright flashlights, look like flashlights, but they're video lights. They put out a lot of lumens, and they're color accurate. But the reason you want to add light back into your scene is that the short version is that as soon as the sun hits the water, you start losing quality of light. So you start losing color range. Your reds are the first thing to go. So if you ever dove into a pool, you notice how people's skin start to look a little bit more bluish. So it's similar and even magnified the deeper you go in the water column. You start losing reds, yellows, magentas. Blue is one of the last colors you lose. That's why the ocean looks so blue.
That's why everything looks blue underwater. Yep.
And the deeper you get underwater, things start looking basically brown and shades of blue. And the only way to really get that color back is to add light back into the scene, through either a flashlight or a strobe. So I would say, as soon as you start getting in the water and your budget allows, add a light onto your GoPro, and then as soon as you switch to a point and shoot, or if you're going to make the jump to a DSLR, go ahead and throw at least one strobe on there.
Totally agree. Great explanation, Dalton. I think the only thing I'd add on top of that is have that mindset that typically you're thinking of using flash above the water. It's to basically add light and fill the light for a subject, whereas underwater, it has a different purpose. It's basically you're painting all the colors that are there back into the scene, whereas if you don't have a light, it basically all gets washed out and turned to blue. So if you're diving or snorkeling, if you're diving for 15 feet or less or snorkeling, you might be able to get away with underwater mode on your GoPro or your point and shoot, or use Magic Filter or something else that has a red filter that basically tries to adjust the white balance so it looks more natural. But that's only going to take you so far. Once you're down past 10 feet, you're really going to start losing the colors even in an underwater mode. And as soon as you have any bit of light, so even those little mini lights will help with your videos, will help with your photos. It'll make all the colors start popping back in, whereas compared to taking photos that with only available light. So definitely a great recommendation, Dalton. And like you said, I think there's so many of these topics we could talk for hours and hours on each of them. And hopefully we will eventually get to drilling down to each one of these topics. But this is kind of just a starter. So as Dalton mentioned, lights are cheap nowadays, especially for GoPros and point and shoots. Definitely worth looking at picking up as one of your first investments after you've got the camera.
And again, you can buy used. I mean, you have lights similar. Icolite, one of the underwater housing companies, they make lights as well as housings, and their lights can get pricey. I think the DS was at $160 that they have now, and they're like a grand or $1,100, something like that.
Yeah, crazy. Yep.
But you can buy a used CNC YS 120, I think is the model number, that runs on AA's. So where the Icolite's rechargeable, this one just runs on AA's, and I think it's 8 of them. And you can pick one of those up for around $150. So you can get into the strobe market slowly. You don't have to like go gung ho and spend $2,000 on 2 Icolite DS160s. You can start with $100 on a CNC, and then add another one a little later and just start working with that.
Well, I think that's a great starter. We'll try to come up with some useful information to put on our show notes, so please check us out there. We'll give you some links of things to look at and places to explore so you can get started. If you have any thoughts or ideas, please email us and reach out to us on our social media. We'll see all that information in the show notes. And again, this is just a starter. We've got a lot of other more information to build upon this episode to really delve into some more details, but we don't want to overwhelm everyone in the very first episode. Having said that, I think our next episode, what we've got coming up for episode number 3, give everyone an idea of some quick tips on how to take a better photograph when scuba diving underwater. So you've got your camera of choice, whether it's a GoPro point and shoot or an SLR. We want to come up and give you guys some ideas on how you can take better photos with that camera underwater.
Sounds good. I think just one thing to take away from all the info that we gave out today is be a good diver first. Become comfortable in the water, good buoyancy, courteous, and relaxed in the water before you start trying to add another discipline to it.
So having said that, why don't we wrap it up here? And Dalton, why don't you tell everyone where they can find out more about you?
They can find me on daltonham.com, piratedivecrew.com for diving, and on Instagram at Dalton Hamm Photography. Same thing with Facebook, Dalton Hamm Photography. What about you, Todd?
They can find more of my work at toddreimerphoto.com. Check out our show notes for more information on where to find more examples of this topic, including several example photos. You can find more episodes of the podcast on the Aquatic Life Podcast.com. Email us with any questions or comments at feedback@theaquaticlifepodcast.com. If you like what you're hearing, please take a moment to rate us on iTunes and subscribe to get all the latest episodes as soon as they come out. Next week, we're going to be giving you our top 5 tips on how to take better underwater photos. Look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Later.